Director and Professor Lee Banville joined the University of Montana faculty in 2009 after 13 years at the PBS NewsHour, where he was editor-in-chief of the online NewsHour. He has written a couple of very large books about American politics. He appears often in the press analyzing Montana politics and media. I am betting that Professor Banville is currently quite famous on the U of M campus for one of the courses he teaches, which is titled Calling BS. You fill in the rest of that. Can't help but note that the League and the library have chosen to title this something different. Please welcome Professor Lee Banville for his presentation, Preparing for the Flood, Misinformation in 2024. Thank you.
You know, if we kept the dirty word in the title, though, there might be more college kids here. Thank you for that introduction. And honestly, thank you to the League and to the library for hosting this event. You know, I'm a little intimidated. There's a lot of you. I'm about to talk about fact checking, and Mike Dennison is sitting in the back, and that's not cool, I don't think. And then Jonathan's over there, and like, at least I taught Jonathan. Man, yeah. But no, it really is a pleasure to be here. This is a topic that obviously motivates a lot of concern, a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety, and I think that what we really want to focus on today is like, how can I give you some tips about how to navigate the modern world of information? Because although it's tricky to get it to load on the screen, we are 1 year out from the 24 election. So it seems wholly appropriate that we would gather to gird our loins for what is going to come. And let's be honest, what has already started. And so today I really want to try and give you some advice about how to do this. We'll do a few group activities, although there's a lot of you and there's even a bunch of people online, so we'll see how that goes. But I want to kind of talk about, in some ways, the tools that we can use to kind of not just not fall for bad information, but every one of you in this room is a producer of content and a sharer of information. Whether it's one-on-one at a, over coffee, or it's on social media, which everyone loves, it is incumbent upon all of us to be smarter consumers of information, because every piece of information we consume helps shape what will be produced for us in the future, right? And so I think I got asked because, yes, I do teach a class that's calling BS. And in it, I really try to get students to think about, it's very easy to get people to believe that everything you're consuming is full of it. But that doesn't actually help us. We actually have to become better participants in the information system, because we can't just let bad information float around and close our eyes and hope it will go away. Because I don't know if you've noticed, it doesn't, right? It is like the weight I put on after we had kids. It just doesn't seem to go anywhere. And I've ignored it, and it's still there. Anyway. So I do want to say, in particular to my beloved Zoom colleagues, that it's important for you to know that we are going to be able to hear your comments and see what you're saying, but we can't really respond to you. So don't take it personally if we don't get back to you right away. But we will try to address any questions that come up there, and also any questions that come up here. Because, there is no magic bullet to this. It's not like I can tell you, oh, hey, I have a list of fact-checking websites. We're good. See y'all next year. It's an ongoing process, and it's a conversation. And conversation is what we need more of, and we need fewer people getting up and rambling aimlessly to groups of people, because that is where a lot of misinformation finds its home. But I need to tell you something as we start. I secretly love election communication. Like, I love it. I love campaign ads. Campaign ads are the best. Like those mean mailers that you get and you're like, wow, I didn't even realize this person is that evil. It's, I don't know, there's an art to it, there's a science to it, but there's an art to it, which I'm gonna just, I found this online, which I find a lot of things online. But this is from a literary magazine called Reason, and they put together just an amazing fake campaign ad. Oh no, it's not gonna work now. Oh, I think it might be because, yeah. Okay, hold on, let's see if this will work.
This election, your choice couldn't be more important. Our candidate is in flattering lighting and full bright color. Their candidate is in grainy high contrast black and white, spotted through a telephoto lens from behind a bush, coming back from God only knows where. Our guy points at the horizon and holds a baby. Their guy doesn't have a baby. Their guy has a golf club. The voiceover for our guy is calm, measured, bright. Their guy gets the lower register, and sometimes we slow down. Our guy has clean headlines and the beautiful lens flare America needs. Here's a scary graph over a photo of their guy awkwardly laughing. Snap zoom. Do you want to snap zoom like that in office? Here's a photo of our guy saluting military veterans. Jump cuts, flashes, static, aggressive colors. You can't trust a guy with graphics like this. Our guy gets stock footage of sunrises and an American flag. Their guy's flag is upside down and on fire, intercut with overdue bills, war, and a crying baby. Our guy gets doctors and astronauts and stimulus checks. Flatline, an eagle, hurricane, the Statue of Liberty, crime scene tape, Ronald Reagan, a girl running in a wheat field to escape a dangerous sexual predator, welding, atomic bomb. This election, the choice is yours. Their guy or our guy. Inspiring slogan.
So, my favorite moment is the welding. Like, why welding? It just drops in there and it's like welding. And it's like, there are a lot of welders in campaign ads. But the reason why this is funny is because we've all seen these ads, right? We know these ads, they're totally familiar. And they are kind of hilarious, right? I mean, because it is always like, this is the person that's running. And I have an ad at the end of this that we're gonna look at, and it's got this low voice because it's a negative ad. But it's also important to understand that because we find this funny, this also tells us that we walk into a campaign with a bunch of assumptions, right? Of what communication looks like, what it sounds like. And I would make one plea to you, which is we have huge personal issues to overcome when we talk about misinformation. We are literally built to not be comfortable with information that does not align with what we already believe to be true. Cognitive dissonance is a thing, and it's a thing that actually there's been research that looks into, well, it's gotten even worse, but it was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the more the audience knew about the conflict, the less they were able to see their own bias in that news coverage. So what it is it's not a thing where it's like, misinformation is a problem of dumb people. It's not. It's a problem of all of us because we are all built to want to be right. And I cannot tell you how often misinformation is really about people who don't agree with me are believing misinformation. And if they just had good information, they would all realize that I am correct and that my candidate should win. And so I make this plea as we start this conversation and this journey and we start to weather the flood. We have to be a little bit humble in our own understanding of issues, right? We have to admit that maybe we don't know the answer. Maybe we're wrong. And that's scary because literally our bodies tell us not to feel that way. And then add to that, we really like it when somebody tells us that we're right. And so those two things together make for, oh, and then let's layer on top of that, a social media system that gives us what we want and that what we like and what we looked at before. What we have is sort of this perfect storm of it's very hard for us to correct our own course. unless we're willing and aware that maybe we might be wrong. Maybe our impressions of people might be off. And so we need to acknowledge that the audience is a big part of this problem, but they're not the only part. And so I do teach this class where I try to get them to start to get out of their own head and think about the larger issues that we're talking about. And so there's also another problem, which is, well, this. So there's actually a concept, I won't use the full name because this is a family-friendly event. But basically, it is so much easier to make misinformation than to fix it. Because, well, this, right? We've all sort of heard like, oh, well, I can go. So I have a friend who works for a fact-checking website that's listed on your handout, if you check it out, called Lead Stories. And they spend a lot of time researching ridiculous claims. Like the other day I talked to her and she was like, well, I spent all morning proving, well, not proving, but basically making the argument that probiotics don't shrink cancer tumors. And I was like, well, why? And they were like, well, there's a guy online who's saying it does, and he's getting a lot of traction. So I had to go in and talk about what probiotics are, what they do, what they don't do, what research has said about this. And it took her hours of work to combat one throw-off post. And so it is a war that we are fighting that we will frankly never win, because it is just easier to make stuff up and just make it up. Like, I don't know, 50% of college students are stoned all the time. Prove me wrong. I mean, you could do it, but it would take an enormous amount of work and a lot more work than it just took me to say that sentence, right? But you might be like, yeah, I think that's true. And now misinformation is born. So yeah, we have this problem, and it's problematic because it often plays to, I want to circle back to that ad I showed. It was funny because we get what's funny about it, right? We know what campaign ads sound like. We know good people versus bad people in campaign ads. That's the whole joke. Well, it is, every one of us has essentially this thing called a theory of mind, which is that we all assume that what's going to happen is what happens. And it actually comes from the natural world. This is the mantis shrimp, which has these giant crazy claws. And for a chunk of their life, they molt the shell, right? And then they got to build a new shell. And during that time, anything could eat it, right? But it walks around like it's got the claws and that they're really sharp, but they're not. But everyone is so used to it being the scary shrimp that the predators don't eat it. It's learned to fake people out. Ravens, which I think are just big crows, but don't test me on that. That could be misinformation. But ravens will take food and pretend to put it in a place and then not put it there and put it somewhere else. And then the stupid squirrel, because the squirrel is stupid, goes to the place and there's no food there. Because the raven has learned that the squirrel assumes that this is what this means. And so this theory of mind, we all have it. And so to put it another way, if I put a thing on a slide, it's clearly important because I put it on a slide, right? This is more important because I'm reiterating it, right? And we're all sort of built this way. And so we need to understand that people who are trying to trick us get that. And so they use our theory of mind to sort of play off of that. So we assume, black and white, high contrast photos are bad. They're bad. I don't know why, but I just assume they're bad. Why? Because I've been built to assume that. And so when they know that, they use that to kind of shape their information. And so I try to kind of get them to think about that. And then I try to get them to think about the fact that oftentimes when people make misinformation, your brother or your uncle or your nephew, You know, the person I'm talking, you know, the person I'm talking about, the person that actually made you come here today. There are several mistakes that oftentimes get made that are not evil. I haven't used the phrase disinformation. Disinformation is when they are literally trying to trick you. That's bad, don't get me wrong, but in some ways, that's like more innocent, because it's like, well, they're bad. So they're trying to trick you, they're bad. Oftentimes the people who are spouting misinformation don't know that they're doing something bad. They feel like they're sharing important stuff with you. And you're like, but it's wrong. And well, yes, that's problematic. But it's, so I really try, and as we think about this, we don't want to make this about the intent of the person. Yes, if it's a Russian bot, yeah, that's bad. If it's AI, oh, don't even get me going. But if it is a relative of yours, or a friend of yours, or that person across the Thanksgiving table, oftentimes we're like, you're wrong. That immediately puts them on the defensive. And so instead, what you want to do is understand why they're wrong, right? Assuming that they are wrong. Maybe they're not wrong. Keep that in mind too. So oftentimes when we see misinformation, it's because people jump to a conclusion, right? Social media has destroyed democracy. Well, maybe, but maybe it's also we destroyed democracy and use social media to do it. Like, we don't always, because these two things happen, does not mean they happen because of each other, right? So, but they do, so like, take for example this, even journalists will do this. So here is Scott Horsley, very good NPR journalist, telling people that the Washington Post poll finds NPR listeners are among the least likely to fall for politicians' false claims. Inoculate yourself from BS, listen to NPR. What's wrong with that? I mean, you might all be NPR listeners and you might be like, that sounds right. I just was hanging out with Shaylee Rager and she's probably like, yeah, that tracks. But what's wrong with that?
Big assumption.
Well, why is it an assumption?
Doesn't correlate.
Because
just because you listen to NPR doesn't mean that you're
you might, yeah, you may be, just because you're less likely to fall for misinformation, it might not be because you listen to NPR. It may be because you're the kind of person who likes to check information and you happen to listen to NPR, but the two aren't caused by each other. They are correlated, right? Not caused. And so it's really important to keep these two straight, and we often don't. Even good old Scott Horsley here is saying the reason why they don't fall for misinformation is NPR. That might not be the case. It may be that just the kind of person who doesn't fall for misinformation is the kind of person who listens to NPR, not because they did. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Causation versus correlation. So I try to get people to sort of pay attention, because when you start to blur those lines, and then you throw on top of it data, because people love data. Oh my gosh, data. They start to like, just, I don't know. Well, here, I'll give you an example.
Perfect timing.
So this is true. This is from the Cleary report from the University of Montana. They have to report every crime that happens on the campus of the University of Montana. Go Grizz. And I realize now that I'm also wearing Bobcat colors, but we're going to set that aside. So this is liquor law violations documented on the campus of the University of Montana. In fact, I'll even do the math for you, because which is scary because I'm a journalist. So, but I double checked it. So between 2019, between 2000, wait, which one is it? Yeah, between 2019 and 2020, there was a 74% drop in liquor use on campus, right? Well, no, wait, no, okay, you don't believe me? Look at this. Look at that chart. Like admissions would pay me to do this chart, right? There's so much about this chart that's problematic. I love it. Because first of all, that's not 0. That's 40, right? So already you're like, oh my God, someone's gone. And you're like, no, just it dropped. But why is this? Keep it clean. Why is this malarkey? It was COVID. Everyone was gone. I'm like, who were the people drinking on campus? It was probably the faculty, I guess. Because they made us go to work. And it was stressful, so never. But this has real, like, unless you're like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. But this thing could float around and be like, oh my gosh, look, UM is really doing its job, knocking down underage drinking. I have bad news for you. I don't think they are. Hi, UM. Oh yeah, we're recording this. Never mind. I'm sure they're doing a great job. But this chart does convey, it has a visual power to it. It tells a story, but that story is misleading. It's not wrong. This is all factually accurate. But the thing it makes us think in our theory of mind is, oh, well, something has changed. Well, yes, no one was there. and you had the mask on all the time, so you couldn't like get the beer through it. And so, yeah, it's always important to kind of have that skepticism to make sure that you don't fall for misinformation. But I'm gonna say something slightly provocative, which is it's not enough to just not fall for it. And this is where it gets a little scary, because if we just let misinformation float around, it doesn't go away on its own accord. And so I'm going to encourage you to try and respectfully and non-aggressively correct information. Don't go after the person, because honestly, that won't help us at all. But try to be like, I heard, there is this thing floating around, but this is what's actually accurate. And what's interesting is okay. So there is a whole process we can kind of go through to kind of tackle sort of how do we respond. And it really depends on the situation, okay? So I'll start with the nerdy version, which is the academic one, which was, so this article ran in the journal Nature. And it was all about the fact that, oh wait, did I skip a slide? No. Okay, it included this chart. And it was about the fact that women's speed in this race was increasing more quickly than men's speed was increasing, right? And so this scatter plot, they love scatter plots in journals, sort of shows that the women's time was dropping much more quickly than the men's, and what they were saying was at some point women will run as fast or faster than men. That was the sort of argument. To which the data scientist was like, here's the funnier thing. According to your chart, at some point, people will be able to run this race instantly. If you go down here and you project it further out, it will get to 0, which is like, well, clearly no. And so they kind of made fun of it. They made it a joke. And that will work sometimes. Sometimes it will not. Because sometimes if people feel like you're making fun of them, they will get real mad. And so what we need to think about is, how do you respond, right? And so this is the sort of, the biostatistics unit kind of critiquing it, which is they figured out, because this is what scientists do, they spent the time to figure out when would it hit 0, and it was 2636. And so what we see is, he points out the logical error in there, and he does it in a way that kind of is playful And yeah, I mean, certainly probably makes the data scientist feel a little stupid, but also sort of gets at the larger point. This oftentimes won't work in politics because the audience is different. And so I decided to look for a different way of confronting misinformation about political stuff. And it's a process called debunking. And to debunk something, when I looked for good examples of who's been doing a lot of debunking, I kept coming back to this document that was produced by a bunch of climate scientists who have spent some quality time trying to debunk it. Not totally taken root, but they've been dealing with a lot of misinformation about climate change. And so they have a process for when a new claim pops up. And so it's kind of structured like this. First of all, and I do like this, it starts with what's actually true, rather than repeating the misinformation up front. You start with what is actually good information. And then you acknowledge that the bad information is out there. And to the degree that we can, I think it is helpful to kind of show the root of the misinformation, but it's not always easy to track that down. Because see that earlier cartoon about how much easier it is to make misinformation than to fix it. So you start with it, then you kind of caution that there is bad information out there, then you explain where maybe that information came from, and then you come back and you revisit the core information that is correct. So, so I make students do this all the time. And so I decided I would go find something. Luckily, Facebook exists, and that made it much easier. So I came across this one. There's old Nikki Haley, who, well, okay, so you can't see it, but she has a Sikh name because she's Sikh American. And so, but she's also been advocating for the use of your given name at birth. So it's playing into a larger sort of fight about gender and identity, but it's also accusing her of essentially whitewashing her name. Because her name is not Nikki Haley. It's, I don't know, it's under the thing. It's something. No, it's fine. It's something else. And so, do you think that's true? Do you think she's whitewashing her name? I mean, Nikki Haley. Come on. It's got to be made up. It's like a made-up name. It's like it's a Ford dealership. I don't know why I picked Ford. But so, okay, how could we check? Should I make Mike do it? He probably could rattle. Huh? Birth certificate. Oh God. Well, that used to be obvious. Yeah. We got voter registration. Wikipedia. I'd start with, okay, let's just go to her, well, all right. I'm gonna start with the most reputable source I can imagine, Nikki Haley's official campaign biography. So you're telling me that you're like, Nikki Haley made everything up about herself? Wow, you guys are prepared for the flood. So it is funny. You will find that actually, I mean, George Santos exists, so it does happen. And it's one of the most basic things you teach a journalism student to do is like check all the stuff in the bio, because, I mean, or also maybe check their master's thesis for plagiarism. I want to make it bipartisan. Okay, so anyway, so Nikki's bio says she was born in 1972 in beautiful Bamberg, South Carolina. And that she is one of 4 children of an Indian American family. So she's already like, she's not pretending she's white, right? She's not like, no, I'm Nikki Haley, the white person. It's like, no, I'm an Indian American. I've always been an outsider, okay? So, but what about this name? Well, First of all, she's been asked a lot, or well, she's been accused by a lot of people. So you can pull this stuff up. This doesn't mean it's true, but she's like, my middle name is Nikki. I've always been called Nikki. It's Punjab for the little one. And so, is it? It is. So I looked it up, and it is, and so she goes by her middle name, and then, you know what she had the audacity to do? Marry a guy named Haley. And she took his name. And so, this is a New York Times article about Nikki Haley, but she has faced criticism for taking that name, taking her husband's name, and going by her middle name. But you'll also read in here that it talks about that she learned to try and fit in. And so there might be some truth to the fact that she chose to go by Nikki versus the more Sikh sounding first name. But it's also true that she's gone by Nikki for many years. In fact, if you go far enough back, there it is, Nimarata Nikki Randhawa, sorry. This is probably why she goes by Haley. And so this is her high school yearbook. I'm sure she loves the fact that this pops up online very quickly. And if you want, you can watch the whole story about all these people from Bamberg who are super proud of Nikki Haley, have always known her as Nikki. And so she's always kind of gone by Nikki. And so is it false that she goes by a name that's not the name that she was given? No. Is it misleading what that person was doing on Facebook? Yeah, it is. So how do we counter it? Well, you could say something like this. So we start with, where did her name come from? Her name came from a combination of her middle name and her married name. So when she got married in 1996, she changed her name. Some do, some people don't, right? And so does that make her like a whitewasher? No, but she has been accused of it on social media. She's also been accused of it by insisting that non-binary young people go by their birth name. So you need to acknowledge that that's still out there. And then you come back and you say, well, where did the Nikki thing come from? Well, it is her middle name and it is this, right? This is information that helps people understand what's out there, but also understand what's true. You can come to your own conclusion about the policy question, right? Like, is she being hypocritical by forcing that? That's different. But she didn't change her name. Well, she did change her name when she got married, like a lot of people. And so this is a response. Now, if we think about it, that was a lot of work to answer what really, honestly, sorry, now I'm gonna pop back. No one's gonna be happy with me right now. Yeah, it was further back than I thought it was, which is really kind of a stupid post, right? And we did all that work just to sort of say, okay, Nikki Haley, maybe she isn't as horrible as you think she is. Maybe she is, but what she's being accused of here might be kind of a cheap shot, right? So now I gotta go back, sorry, I should have thought this through, but the next time I do this, it's gonna be so much better. So I think we should do one kind of collectively. I'm gonna let people online participate on this as well. But I want us to sort of think through as a group, which should be chaotic and really unsuccessful. Even this morning, my colleagues at the league were like, maybe with a room full of 90 people, we don't try to do this. But you know what? I ought to make mistakes. Okay, so let's get something from this year. Okay, here we go. And you already know it's gonna fulfill your stereotypical political ad, because John Tester looks evil. And he's black and white. It's never good. So here we go.
Washington changes people. Just look at John Tester. Tester promised to stand up for Montana veterans.
I get up every day trying to make sure we do right by our veterans in this country.
But instead, he sold them out, voting with extreme liberals to deny wounded veterans their Second Amendment rights, limiting constitutional freedoms, pushing more government control, breaking his promise to Montana veterans. Tell Jon Tester, stand up for our Second Amendment rights.
Now, if I really wanted to, and I could for days, I could tell you that that is in fact not a campaign ad. Right? It's not. What is it? Well, yeah, it's an attack ad. It's an issue ad. They're not telling you not to vote for Jon Tester. They're just telling you that you should give John a call and tell him to defend veterans' Second Amendment rights. It's just an issue thing, people, okay? Plus, we don't even know who he's running against yet. So, but yeah, Jon Tester, bad, right? So what is the story they want this ad to convey? What are some elements of it?
He doesn't support veterans.
He doesn't support veterans.
He's dishonest.
He's dishonest because he's secretly, you know what he is? He's a Washingtonian. Part of the swamp. Oh, good. Oh, the swamp. You know, I lived in the swamp for 15 years. It is, in fact, a swamp. I mean, like literally, it is a very humid place. And it was a swamp, but I kind of take umbrage at that, but it's okay. All right, so he's a creature of the swamp. He doesn't like veterans. What else? He doesn't like guns. Okay. Well, all of that seems to be bad, right? So how could we check? Anybody know? Anybody know some logistics of campaign ads? Oh, who sponsored it? Yeah. So this is the NRSC, National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. Oh, weirdly, Steve Daines runs it. I don't know, it may make their little like get-togethers more awkward. I will also tell you this exact same ad with the exact same wording was done about Joe Manchin as well. And so, all right, so we can look up who did it. What else can we look up?
Look up his history of veterans supporting people.
So check, so here's the thing I love about laws sometimes. They have to tell us something. So I give you, oh gosh, it's at the bottom of the thing. I'm gonna tell you what's under there, secretly. So they have to put a little credit, a little source tag that says where they get this accusation. And I'll tell you, it's a Senate roll call vote, number 171. Okay, so what should we do? So Google it. That's a good idea. Oh, let's Google it. So we Google it and we find out this is what he voted on Joint Resolution, HJA Resolution 44, a joint resolution providing the congressional disapproval under Chapter 8, Title 5 of the US Code of a rule submitted by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives related to the factoring criteria for firearms with attached stabilizing braces. Bump stocks. Well, it's kind of different than a bump stock.
I didn't write a word, because it's what the living.
It's very confusing.
What? No. Chapter 8, Title 5 of the US Code. So it isn't veterans have the rights to have guns law, right? It's something different. Okay. So now you know. So what do we do now? I mean, we could click on it. And it'll take you to a very big, huge law. It was rejected. So yeah, there's a bunch of negatives going on in this thing, right? So what it is, and isn't this fun? So essentially, ATF came up with a law, or sorry, a rule. So as a federal agency, they can come up with rules. All federal agencies can for things that they are given the power by Congress to do and regulate. And so they came up with a rule about, well, here, I'll show you. These modifications to pistols. So essentially sawed-off shotguns are really illegal. But what's not illegal is you take a pistol and you turn it into essentially a sawed-off shotgun. It's sort of a short barrel rifle. It has all the things of a rifle, but the functioning part of it is a pistol. And so ATF was like, the gun manufacturers have kind of come up with this end run around sort of our short barrel rifle law, which they've been illegal since the 30s. And so they're like, we're going to regulate them. So you have to notify us if you buy a thing that turns your pistol into essentially a kind of high caliber rifle. And Congress was like, absolutely not. You can't do that. So the Republicans in Congress put forward a proposal to say the Bureau's rule is unconstitutional and should be shot down. And so Congress voted on it. And indeed, in case, let's see, I'll pop back here for a second. Oh, I didn't have on here. It was a 50-49 vote. Tester voted no.
Yeah.
Manchin voted no, meaning that the ATF could put that rule into effect. So he did vote to allow the government to regulate these firearms. Now, he didn't vote to regulate them. He voted to not have Congress get involved in it, right? But he did vote for it. Well, yeah, he voted against it. Now, fun fact though, why is this a veteran thing?
Because disabled veterans sometimes can't hold them.
Correct.
They have to brace themselves so they can use them.
Correct.
A firearm.
But nothing in the law talks about veterans at all. In fact, one part of it says that those for individuals with disabilities, not veterans, but individuals with disabilities, certain forms of the gun needed to be registered. Other forms didn't. It depended on the type of brace that the person was using, right? So it's super complicated, is what it is. Could there be a disabled veteran in the state of Montana who no longer could use their rifle because of this law?
Yes.
Yes. Are there any? We don't know. But when we get to the boiled down narrative of John Tester voted this way because he opposes our disabled veterans' Second Amendment rights, it's a bit more complicated. But did he vote to allow the government to do this? He did, even though he was voting against getting involved. You follow? So what it means, though, is some of what that ad says is accurate. He did. This is one of the only gun control votes that have come up in a long time. And he did vote to allow the government to regulate, right? Is it fair to say he did it to sell out the veterans? Feels a bit stretchy. Because it totally could affect disabled veterans, some of them. But was this a vote about disabled veterans? That feels a little bit more stretched, right? So how do we explain all that? Any thoughts? What's true?
The government is wanting to regulate it, not to take it away.
So they might take them away though, depending on the actual rifle. Because essentially, if they find that the gun brace does essentially turn it into a short barrel rifle, then it does fall under the regulations that ban those. So it could lead to that. It doesn't necessarily, right? And so but the argument is this is a step towards doing that, even though it didn't do it yet.
What are those for? What are they using for?
Well, for a variety of things, as was pointed out, many veterans don't have the ability, many disabled individuals who may or may not be veterans, don't have the ability to brace the gun without it being sort of molded to their arm,
To shoot an animal, I mean, like a deer?
And anything.
At anything, just trap shoot or like, I mean, it's a completely legit sort of tool for someone who wants to use a firearm, who doesn't have the full use of their arms.
Sometimes the weight too.
And sometimes the weight.
That's why women sometimes use them.
See, it's, yeah, go ahead.
Not to stay away from the whole gun thing, but maybe point to the inaccuracies in the veterans attacks, because Tester is known for his support of veterans, so that's why I'm bringing that in.
True, but are we here to defend John Tester or to say what's true? Yeah.
But then, because the ad says that he sold them out.
Right,
And
right.
to say, well, that's not true. John Tester supports veterans.
Ooh, I don't know if I want to say that part. I mean, what does support veterans mean? I mean, you could argue, I mean, he's done a lot, don't get me wrong, but like, you gotta be really careful, because if you say John Tester supports veterans, then anybody who disagrees with John Tester has stopped listening to you. Because you're like, oh, sure, whatever. And so, but we do want to focus on the fact that this was not a bill that specifically targeted veterans, right? So that's a legit thing to say, but it could affect disabled gun owners. So you want to say that too. So, and you also want to say that this is part of a campaign that's trying to make John Tester look like he is not what he used to be, right? Because underneath this is like, John Tester used to be a good guy, and then he went to Washington. And sorry, I was trying to get my ad voice going. So here's a shot. Probably shouldn't have said shot. So John Tester voted to allow a new federal rule to require that pistol owners who use most stabilizing braces register those modified guns with the ATF. He did do that. A new ad from a group hoping to elect Republicans to the Senate accuses Tester of voting to take Second Amendment rights away from disabled veterans. That is true. That is what the ad says. The law does not address veterans at all. It does not deny disabled or other gun owners from having these stabilizers, but only requires their registration. Now, that's not probably super satisfying because you're like, he supports veterans. And it's like, well, okay, maybe, but that's not what I'm trying to answer right now. What I'm trying to tell you is there are elements of this ad that are correct. And there are elements of this ad that draw inferences that are not maybe fair. But you can make your decision about that. But here's the information that is actually accurate. Does that make sense? So it's going to be a long year. And yeah, it already has been. I want to highlight that there are people, I'm going to use the J word, which is controversial, journalists, who are going to try to do this kind of work. Right, Jonathan? You're going to do that? Yeah? Yeah, good, okay. What I would encourage is we could start by talking about federal, I mean, the Tester race is fine, but I really struggle when it's like, when this becomes a conversation about Fox News versus MSNBC versus fill in the blank group that somebody hates. Because it's a dumpster fire up there, right? At the national level, and there's not a lot we can do. And that makes me sad, but it also is true. Like, we will not fix misinformation at the national level. But what we can start to work on is trying to fix things at our local level and maybe our statewide level. Even that is a daunting challenge. But it seems more doable to me. Now, I do have a whole boatload of resources that's on the piece of paper that do give you some interesting federal sort of national fact checks. But I would really also stress the importance of local organizations, statewide organizations, be it Like the work of Jonathan or the work of the Montana Free Press or other organizations that are trying to tackle these issues at the state level, the lead bureau, all of them, I'm sure everybody has thoughts about all of them. But there are people who are trying to get at these truths. But it will always be, taking a water pistol to a dumpster fire. And we'll knock a few down and the fire will continue to burn. But what I can plead for you all to think about is how do we make this as if you run into misinformation out there, to try and participate a little. Don't get into some kind of Twitter war, or I guess X war, or whatever we're calling it now. Don't get, your uncle to stop following you or whatever. Well, actually, that might be great. I don't know. My poor uncle. I always talk about the uncle. I don't know why it's always an uncle. And I only have one. He's a nice guy. But really try and just nudge the conversation towards the point of accuracy, right? So it actually started to happen right here where it was like, this is about the bump stock bill. It wasn't, right? It's totally understandable why that would come up, but it's a different thing. And so to kind of just tweak it to make sure that we know what we're talking about and we're all on the same page there. We're not going to agree about probably anything, but that's okay. Our system is built to do that. But what we can't do is just pretend that if I ignore bad information, it will fix itself. So we're kind of all in it together. The good old days of, Walter Cronkite telling us, which had its own problems, and why I say Walter Cronkite, Jim Lair telling us, he was my boss and he was scary. He was a Marine. Do not mess around with him. But that is what really does start to kind of, those days are over. And now we're kind of all in it together, which is terrifying, but is where we are.